and so the volume 1, number 1 is incredibly rare. We have all of those in the Heritage Room now because I gave them all to the Heritage Room. And what that means is that we have all of the original appearances of the poems that Loren and Mabel wrote for the Prairie Schooner in those very early years. The most beautiful story about the Bone Hunter film is the fact that, that Christine had gotten all of the work done and she thought she was done filming. And she was sitting in her office one day and realized that what she really ought to have is a picture of Daisy's gravestone out in Wyuka Cemetery. And so she assembled her film crew and they went out to get a picture. And this was a beautiful day in the sense that it was snow on the ground and it was a light snow falling. And so she went out and she got a chance to take a picture of Daisy's stone with the snow falling and all that. It was going to be really nice. And while they were standing there with their cameras all set up, a little fox came out from over here and it walked all the way across in front of them and they got a picture of it. And so that was the fox at the wood's edge and they got to have that in their film. And it's a beautiful, it comes at the end of the film and it's really very nice. I met with a lot of the people who came to speak, but I'm only going to deal with some people that I knew that really meant a great deal to me. The first was Dmitri Brzezinski. Dmitri was a professor at Purdue, and he was a native Russian, and he had translated into Russian 5 of Eiseley's essays. And he was trying, and he talked with us about, he came and talked to us. He told about how that kind of writing really didn't speak to Russians. They just had not ever read anything like that, and how, of course, they appreciated it, but they had just never seen anything like that. His little book was called Wing Beat. Of course, it had a Russian title. Then later on, he did 3 more essays, and his title of the book, again, was in Russian, but it translated to The Secret of Life, a lyrico-philosophical triptych. Well, Dmitri was a great guy, and he came to us twice. He came and talked to us twice. He was a member of our organization. I talked to him on the phone a good many times, and we lost him a short while back, and so he's not with us anymore. Another fellow that we met was David McShane. McShane was a Presbyterian preacher. I think he was Presbyterian. But he had grown up in the Eiseley neighborhood, and he was an old neighbor. And he told about how they'd be walking down the street, and Daisy would be on the porch, and she would invite them in to have a glass of lemonade. And so he had a very good impression of Daisy, which was very essential that we get somebody who could write something for us that gave a good statement of Daisy that showed she was a really nice person and all of that sort of thing, because she takes a lot of flack in the writing. I asked David to write something for me to put in the caravan, and so he sent me a beautiful letter. And that is in the caravan, and I believe the caravans are on the website, and so you can read that letter, and it's called Lemonade with Daisy. And David McShane was very interested in the Eiseley family. I was at home one night when I got a phone call from a friend of mine who was a librarian at the Historical Society. And she says, we've got a fellow down here who's asking about this Eiseley fellow. He says, I think you ought to get down here right away. And so I went down, and what I found was Murray Murphy. Murphy was a professor from Penn, and he was doing research here on some subject. I think he was a historian. And he was a professor of a different discipline. And the impression I kind of have is that Eiseley kind of liked to associate with people that weren't his own science faculty. He liked to be with other people. Murray said that he and Eiseley lived out about in the same part of the woods, and so they frequently rode together on the commuter line into school. But more than that, he was a frequent lunch partner with Eiseley. They liked to have lunch together, and they just would have extended conversations. One of the things that, and again, I asked Morrie to write me something, and he did, and I published that in the Caravan, and so you all can read that. One of the things we talked about was how conservative Eiseley was, and how he was really hating what was going on in campus during the period of the anti-war stuff when we were in Vietnam. And he was really fussed about all of the student unrest. I talked about Cousin Walter. Cousin Walter was teaching classes, and he was teaching classes at Drexel, which is essentially the same campus. And the students actually came in and disrupted his classes. One of them, they completely ended it, and then the other one, Walter told me how he feared for the safety of his students. So this stuff was going on out there. Well, Eiseley was Bert Schultz told me that Eiseley wanted to retire because it was time, and one of the thoughts that he had was coming back to Nebraska. And the idea he had was that he'd like to have that Maple Lodge house that is the one on Euclid Street that it figures in one of the Eiseley essays. And so he asked Bert to look into that for him, and that house was actually available at that time. Well, what happened on our campus is that we had student unrest too, and our kids took over the ROTC space on campus and occupied it for some time. And Eiseley said, well, if that sort of thing is going on out there, there's just no point in me leaving here. And he didn't, and he stayed in Wynwood for the rest of his days. Another person that was really notable was Harvey Potthoff. Harvey had retired from the Illa Theological, I think it's a seminary in Denver. That's a Methodist, a religious school for Methodists where they train, the preachers, and where preachers go to school. When Harvey retired, he became a visiting professor for a short term out here at Wesleyan, and he taught ethics. But he also had a tremendous involvement in the town because he had little seminar things where a great many townsfolk went out and just enjoyed being with him. And he was a delightful person. And I got to know him through our chamber music, and because he came to that, and we became friends, and so I actually got to talk to him quite a bit. One of the things that we were having a problem with at that time, and this was something that really freaked out Naomi, we were having a problem because people were wanting to make a religious cult out of Eiseley, and there was a lot of this stuff going on. And Naomi just really would climb the walls over it. And so Harvey and I talked about that, and Harvey said, you know what I'd really like to do? He says, I'd like to write a paper about Eiseley's religious attitudes and ideas. And so Harvey did that. And he gave a paper. He spoke here in the Heritage Room. He spoke to our organization. And I got a little money from Molly Fisher at the Heritage, at the Humanities, and we published a little book. And I don't have copies that I can give out, but this thing could certainly be Xeroxed. If somebody really wanted to have this material, it could be Xeroxed, and it wouldn't be a big job. It would be, it would only be a few sheets of paper. I think probably 8 or 9 sheets of paper. So that was a very exciting thing for me to be associated with Harvey Potthoff. Another person that I want to talk about is Dorothy Thomas. Of course, Dorothy Thomas was a friend of the Eisleys. She graduated from the university, and she was a friend of Loren and Mabel. And I think it was probably Dorothy Thomas that first sensed the spark that might be between the two of those people. And she did write a poem, as it was referred to by Herb Hyde, about the two of them. The Eisleys visited Dorothy on their honeymoon. Dorothy was at that time living with Mary Austin, and Mary Austin was a very prominent writer in the Southwest. Her book called The Land of Little Rain was the book that she's best known for. That was actually produced by PBS as a feature on our television series a couple years ago. I thought that was pretty nice. Well, the Eisleys visited Dorothy, who was living with Mary Austin, and Mary Austin died. Eiseley wrote a requiem for Mary Austin, a beautiful poem which was read at the funeral. Dorothy's archives are in the Heritage Room. They have a good. Of course, they're about her work, but they have an Eiseley element in them. Dorothy came to speak to our group more than once, and in the very last time that she was here, she visited. She had gone to Cotner College before going to the university. Cotner College was a Disciples of Christ college that used to be up north in town, and it's all gone now. But she was here, and she visited her Cotner classmate at Milder Manor, namely Carol Cornelius. And so she spent a whole afternoon with Carol Cornelius at Milder Manor. Well, you might want to know who that Carol Cornelius was. Carol Cornelius Mitchell was the mother of Amy Mitchell Tuttle. So now, Dorothy had a sister named Kenetha, and Kenetha was a writer for the Nebraska Farmer. And the Nebraska Farmer was owned by the McKelveys, there's McKelvey furniture in this room here. Kenetha wrote a front page cover story about Joseph Cornelius, who would be Amy's great-grandpa, who, with other kin of Amy, was on the wagon train taking military supplies to Albuquerque, which was ambushed by the Indians at the Great Bend of the Kansas River, Arkansas River down in Kansas, near Fort Larned. And so we have some interest in Dorothy Thomas. I had a lot of contact with Athena Spalding. Athena was Leo's daughter, and Leo, remember, was the stepbrother of Loren. She never came here, but I talked to her on the phone a great many times. I corresponded with her. She was a very nice lady, and as you know, Loren took responsibility for her. He saw to it that she got a college education and so forth and so on. And so that was there isn't much to say about that, but it was a nice relationship. Another thing I'd like to tell you about really doesn't have anything to do with our organization, but it's just a story that I'd like to tell. And this has to do with when Eiseley came to the campus to give the Montgomery lectures. And the Montgomery lectures for that year happened long before our organization was started, of course. But they were celebrating the anniversary year of Francis Bacon. And so Eiseley gave 3 papers on the subject of Francis Bacon. And then, as they always did, the university press published the Montgomery lectures in a little book. And so they did that, and the university press thoroughly messed up the publication. And Eiseley was just absolutely frantic over it. And the upshot from that is that whole edition was scrapped. There are very few copies of that early volume out. The early volume was called Francis